You've got now, can we please give a massive whoop, cheer, and welcome to Danny Nemu.
Hello everybody. I'm going to set fire to something. Does anyone object to frankincense? No demons in the room. Drugs in the Bible. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bavad. If you were to ask her, are there any drugs in the Bible, what would she say? Yes. None. I am the Reverend Danny Nemu. I am a real reverend. I was ordained on the internet for $15 back in about 2001. So this is proper legit. I'm also a Bible fiend. So if there are any drug fiends in the audience, patience, we'll get there. But I want to talk briefly about the Bible first. Do we have any Hebrew readers in the room? No? Okay. This is the first line of Genesis, and it says, reading from the right to the left, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, as it's usually translated. However, that's what it looks like with the vowel points in the Hebrew. And the Hebrew doesn't really have any vowels, and you can pronounce words without the vowels in many different ways, and they can mean wildly different things. In the same way that hat and hot mean different things because the vowel changes, and my hat is hot means a different thing to my hattie is a hottie. When you change the vowels, the meaning can change a lot. So the Masoretes in the 10th century AD, they decided to standardize what the Bible means by putting in vowel points and saying this is what it means. And before that, and even today in some places, there are different traditions of pronunciation, which means the meaning is quite different. So in the Eastern Orthodox churches, for example, they have different translations because they come from different pronunciation traditions. That was in the 10th century AD. AD. So this was Nachmanides, who was one of the greatest sages of all time in the Jewish tradition. He's not some kind of outlier hippie. And he said this. He said that the Bible was originally written in black fire on white fire. And it was written without spaces. And when you break up words in different places, it reveals different secrets. And there may be something in that, because this is an inscription from about the time that the Bible was written, and it's in the language the Bible was originally written in, Paleo-Hebrew. And you can see it doesn't have any spaces, and obviously it doesn't have any vowels either. So he gives an example of how you might break up the first line of the Bible in a different way to reveal a different secret. So let's just stuff them together and then pull them apart. And this is what he says, right? You take those two last letters of the first word, put them on the second word, and that Bereshit becomes Barosh Yitbara Elohim. So Bereshit Bara Elohim, Barosh Yitbara Elohim. Right? Barosh means in the head, and Yitbara makes the creation passive. In the head was created, and Elohim means God, or gods, or powers, or drives. And in fact, that the vowels work, the tenses work differently as well. So was created can also mean is being created or will be created. And that's a rather interesting way to start a book, which has all kinds of experience where a guy sees some stuff on the wall that everyone else doesn't see. Or angels appear but other people don't see them. And you could read this as psychiatric experience, or you could read this as mystical experience. But the fact that this Bible starts in the head, if you look at it a certain way, is pretty interesting. And you can do some kind of similar wordplay with the rest of that line, and it becomes Atashamayim v'ata. You are heavens and you are earth. It's a nice way to start a book. I remember back back in the day, I was lying underneath an apple tree on mushrooms, and I was watching the leaves in communication and transmitting things between them and the air. And I know about the biology. I know that oxygen and carbon dioxide and all kinds of phytochemicals are passing between them. But I was there and I was seeing it, and I was lying on the ground, and I could feel how the roots were connecting to the earth and drawing things in, and I felt my own body kind of melting into that breathing, living cosmos. You are heavens and you are earth. And this is what psychedelics can do for us. They blur the edges of things, right? So when a little bit like when the words, you look at it, you put it all together and you break it up in different places, and it reveals different secrets. So they're very useful for therapy, for example. You may have a problem. You might think, my wife's a nightmare. And then you look again and you put the edges somewhere else, and you might think, oh, we're a nightmare. And then you can do, maybe I'm the nightmare. Maybe you can reorganize your situation. So it's a very psychedelic book. And let's talk about drugs. Frankincense, there's some frankincense, it's burning away. Frankincense is from the Boswellia tree, which grows in Oman. And to get frankincense from Oman all the way to Palestine is 1,500 miles, 6-month camel trek through robber-infested deserts. It's a really long way to go for a posh smell. But there's more to it than a posh smell, because frankincense, this route has been going on for 6,000 years. It was burned to Ra in Egypt before it was burnt to Yahweh. It was burned to Baal in Canaan and also in Babylon. And so why were they doing it? Well, let's have a think about frankincense. Frankincense is classed as anxiolytic, which means I haven't got there yet. It's a GABA receptor agonist. It works on the GABA system, which is the same system as Valium, for example, diazepam. GABAergic cells, neurons, are the most common cells in your brain. 40% of your neurons are GABA cells. And of all of your brain cells, they're either GABA cells or they're next to GABA cells. It's an inhibitory system. That means it chills out your brain firing, let's put it that way. So that's one thing that it does. You've got a few different things in frankincense. It's actually got loads of things. But it also interferes with dopamine reuptake, which means it increases the amount of dopamine in your synapses. And dopamine is involved with language production, it's involved with reward pathways, it's involved with creativity. And we're going to see how that's important soon. It's also anxiolytic, it reduces anxiety. It's also antidepressant. But let's not get too fixated on these words, which come from the poorhouses and lunatic asylums of history. I'm more interested in what the ancient people thought about it. But no one ever learned anything about drugs by listening to me talk about them. So I brought some along. Your dose is about the size of 2 garden peas. If you have much more than that, you're going to start to offend the flora in your gut. But go ahead, I'm going to pass it. Maybe it's just snake up this way, and then round there, and back down. Get it in. These are my daughters, by the way. I'm pushing drugs on my daughters. No? Okay, fair enough. The apple fell far from the tree. So I just want to say one more thing about the psychopharmacology of frankincense as well. It works on the TRPV3 ion channels. This is really complicated and fascinating part of the brain, the ion channels. And it's involved in psychoactivity. It's also involved in aura before migraine and epilepsy. And aura is when people start to sense presences and see lights moving around and feel terror and feel awe. And what else do they do? Deja vu and all these things which you can see in prophetic experience in the Bible, and you can also see in mystical experience today. So I'm kind of fascinated by this aura thing. Now, I was going to talk to these guys who wrote that article, but they've already patented insansol acetate, and they're also kind of working for Israeli pharma cannabis companies. And I've discovered stuff, I don't want to tell them, but if anyone's into kind of psychopharmacology of the ion channels, then talk to me, because I've got some stuff to say. Anyway, this frankincense is brought to you by the Frankincense Store in London. Shout out to Shabazz. There's going to be a discount code later if you want to buy some. Myrrh is from the Commiphora plant, and it contains loads of sesquiterpenoids which work on the opioid system, like opium or heroin or saffron, stuff like that. So there are three of them. One of those has the same potency on pain receptors as, well, not the same, 10% of the potency of morphine. So these are pretty strong. And we're going to see shortly how they get stronger. It also contains a bunch of different chemicals that you might recognize if you're into cannabis psychopharmacology. And I want to talk about these last three, eugenol, safrole, and elemesine. Remember elemesine in particular, because we're going to come out later. They are structurally very similar to MDMA and mescaline. So myrrh I'm going to be passing around once you've got through your frankincense. Right, so this is called nataf in Hebrew, which means prophecy, and it also means distill, which is rather interesting. Hebrew works in ways where one word can mean quite wildly different things, but they're often quite connected. So the prophecy is a kind of, in a way you can see it as a distilled summation of what needs to be said, and the myrrh itself is the kind of distillate, it's what's squeezed out with all the powerful chemicals of the tree. And it's used in prophecy. And synergy. So things get really interesting when we start talking about synergies. In modern pharmacology, we tend to try and isolate what they call active compounds. And I think that's a rather blunt instrument, really. But the ancients had a whole different way of going about things, and they combined things in different ways. Frankincense and myrrh has been combined. It's in Chinese medicine, it's used in Egyptian preparations, Persian medicine. When you combine these two together, leave it in water overnight, they affect each other and produce these are all novel chemicals that are produced in the interaction. And they increase its anti-cancer properties, and they increase its effect on the opioid system as well. And something else I want to say about the synergy of frankincense and myrrh before I go on is colloidal gold seems to affect the way the blood-brain barrier transmits drugs across it. So when you've got the synergy, I think there's something in the synergy basically of myrrh, frankincense and gold, the gifts or the magi's to the baby Jesus. Yeah, I'm going to try and make some colloidal gold, but I need some gold. Anyway, let's talk about the anointing oil, which is a really interesting synergy. This is from Exodus 30. It is Shemen HaMishcha in Hebrew, and Mishcha is where we get the word Mashiach, which is Messiah in English. So the Messiah is the anointed one. And Masha is also the root of our word massage, and it means to wipe or to paint in English. So this is a bad drawing really, that's not how you do it. It's smeared all over the body, which is a common way of getting drugs into the body in, again, Persian, Egyptian medicine. And it's used very specifically for a king. And in fact, so the Messiah in the olden days wasn't the dude looking unhappy pinned up to the wall in the church. He was a king, and a powerful king, and he was anointed at the beginning of his reign. And the reason he was anointed was to create a direct connection between him and the tribal deity Yahweh, because he was the kind of mouthpiece, or he had to rule people and do what Yahweh wanted him to do. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the spirit of Yahweh came upon David strongly from that day forward. So pretty strong stuff. It's also used by priests when they go into the tabernacle. They smear this stuff on them. So what's it got in it? Well, myrrh. We've already talked about the opioid receptor agonists, and we've talked about the MDMA-like stuff. Cannabisem is translated in modern Bibles as calamus. It's wrong. Most certainly. It's used for making clothes, and if you made clothes out of calamus, it's a reed grass. It would decay immediately in a couple of days. So better translations translate it as hemp. That there is the word cannabis, right? So the plural is cannabisem, the singular cannabis. It means fragrant cane. I used to be rather partial to a fragrant caning myself. So that's what it looks like, cannabis. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The reason we call canvas is because clothes used to be made out of cannabis back in the day. So Herodotus visits the Scythians in the 5th century BC, and he says hemp grows in Scythia. The Thracians make garments of it which closely resemble linen. And then he talks about the hot box. So they fold down the flaps of the tent, and then the Scythians take some of this hemp seed and, creeping under the felt coverings, throw it upon the red hot stones. Immediately it smokes and gives out such a vapour as no Grecian vapour bath can exceed. The Scyth, delighted, shout for joy. I can't burn it today, sadly. So these are some vessels in Scythia. which they found cannabis and also opium on them, which is interesting. So yeah, we know the Scythians had cannabis, which is next door. In fact, we know that all of these guys had cannabis, and they all called it something very close to cannabis. The idea that the Israelites didn't have it is ridiculous. In Egypt, it was found archaeologically on Ramses II's mummy, and Palestine was obviously a trade route on the way to Egypt. And in Judah, we also have residues found at Tel Arad, which is an 8th century BC shrine. So that's frankincense, that's cannabis they found there. And another thing that's really interesting about this is that there's 2 altars in this Israelite shrine, one to a god, but one to a goddess who's connected to cannabis. So he seems to split up with his wife as well. Yeah, so where are we going with this? So yeah, that's pretty interesting if you're a pothead, but cinnamon and cassia are even more interesting. So this gets a little bit complicated, so yeah, let's have a think. How's that frankincense going down? Did it get over to that side yet? Oh, yeah. Don't bogart the frankincense, people. Right, so we need to talk about the cytochrome enzymes, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with how ayahuasca works, but if you eat DMT on its own, it won't do anything. It won't go into your brain. It will get broken down in your gut by the monoamine oxidase enzyme. But if you ayahuasca is a mix of 2 things. It's DMT containing plant, and it's also the ayahuasca vine, which contains beta-carbolines, and these inhibit that enzyme. So basically what happens is the DMT can get through, those enzymes are knocked out for a while, so the DMT can get to your brain and do marvellous things to your brain. And you have something similar going on with cinnamon and cassia. So that is one of the cytochrome enzymes. There's 5 of them that we're going to talk about. And in this enzyme system, they break down 99% of the drugs which you're likely to encounter. So this one, CYP3A4, breaks down L-mesine, which is the one we saw before that's in myrrh, and other things. So if you take it on its own, it will be a mild sedative. But if you take it with an inhibitor, it becomes like mescaline, right? So what is an inhibitor? Well, cinnamon is actually an inhibitor. So these are the 5 different cytochrome enzymes which are your defense system against drugs. And cinnamon is active against 4 of them, and cassia is active against the other one. So what does that mean? It means that your whole defense system for 99% of the drugs that you're going to encounter is wiped out by cinnamon and cassia in the right doses. Now, don't eat these things, cinnamon and cassia. You have to rub it on your skin. If you make a massage oil of it, careful where you rub it, because it's really spicy. But if you do it right, and then you can get these terpenes from all kinds of things, German chamomile, basil. There's a whole subset of heads who like to, they call it oil-ayahuasca, but they like to burn, combine all these things together. And so these things are normally sedatives, and we're talking about L-mesine, estradiol, eugenol, the stuff in nutmeg, all that kind of stuff. It changes them from sedatives into, these are some of the comments from Erowid, electric LSD-like psychedelic. A euphoria washes over me that grows in intensity by the minute, falling constantly into some kind of abyss inside myself. That sounds like fun. Visions of a bulging-eyed, white-skinned man in ceremonial armour. That's a really interesting one, because that's kind of, Yahweh is not far off that. He's described as a man of war, and this particular guy took something which was chemically quite similar to the anointing oil. Right, so we haven't got a whole lot of time, but I just want to say briefly that, so once the priests all go into the tabernacle, and they all get smeared with this enzyme inhibitors, and cannabis, and myrrh, and then the high priest goes off on his own, and he goes into the back of the tabernacle. And I'm just burning some myrrh now, and in fact, I'm going to pass around some myrrh as well. Your dose for this is about the size of a very large piece of fancy sugar. So I'll start over here, and you can pass it round. Enjoy it, basically. So he would go into the back of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is described over 5 chapters of the Bible. It's the most detailed thing in the Bible. The different types of skins over it, how the frame is constructed, where the pegs are, and it's a hot box, basically. About 4.5 meters cubed, at the back of the tabernacle is a chamber called the Holy of Holies. or the dabir. And there, the only thing you do is burn finely ground handfuls of incense and talk to angels. And so that's what's in it. They're all drugs. I haven't got time to talk about them. This one here is Neptadini pyrotechnica. Is really interesting because it's that which causes smoke to rise, right? Which is seen as a good thing. So can you imagine, like, he's burning in that chamber tons and tons of these incenses, and then when he opens that veil, the veil, by the way, is the thickness of a man's hand, so it really is a kind of tightly contained chamber, and that smoke would come out of the tabernacle and then rise like a pillar of smoke at the door. So when you read about the pillar of smoke that the Israelites followed, you might be reading about the pillar of smoke that the shaman priest was using in divination, because that's what he did. He'd go in there and you say, right, it's time to go, it's time to attack these guys, it's time to run away from these guys. You know, they went in there in order to get instructions on how to move through the wilderness and, you know, war divination and stuff like that. So the pillar of smoke would rise, and perhaps that's what we're talking about here. The other priests, not quite so high priests, they used to then go and eat the showbread. Now, we know it had frankincense in it, we don't know what else it had in it, but we do know that it was very, very potent. In the size of a bean, and the delicate priest refused to take it all together. It once happened, one took his own share, and his fellows, and he was nicknamed Robber till his death. I don't know if you've got a friend called Drug Hoover Percy who picked up that name at Glastonbury or something, but that's what we're talking about here with the high priest. Okay, very briefly, this is the only example of synesthesia in the Bible, and all the people are seeing the voices and the sound of the trumpet. You don't normally see voices unless you're on acid. You don't normally have all the people doing it. In scripture, generally, in the Bible, even like Krishna appears to Arjuna on his own. Generally, one person has a revelation. But in this case, all of the Israelites, all at the same time, see this wonderful sight. And it's the time when they are all eating manna. So what's manna? Well, again, very low on time, but it looks exactly like ergot, as it's described, in both its forms. It's also a secretion like ergot. It tastes like honey like ergot. It rots very quickly like ergot. It grows at the same times, and the way you prepare it, as described in the Bible, is it has to be ground and boiled and baked. And that's how you get LSA, which is a cousin of LSD, out of ergot. So I think it's ergot. I don't even have time to talk about how Exodus, the whole thing, seems to be an analogue or a kind of analogy of the trip story where you leave behind the shackles of your conditioning and go across the wilderness not really knowing where you're going and then arrive in the promised land. There's more to it than that, but I haven't got time to go into it. You can read more in a number of books. One of them is Exodus, another one is Psalms, another one is Proverbs, another one is Song of Songs, and then there's these two, particularly that one there on the green one, which talks about all this kind of stuff. And I'm generally interested in how minds change. So some of it's about linguistics and how different languages change how we think. Some of it's about autism and ADHD and epilepsy and how that changes how you think, or meditation, or getting stuck at sea for weeks and how that changes how you think and how you perceive and how cognition works. On that matter, I'm really into, I'm a hypnotist as well, so I'm doing hypnotic sessions here in Hastings as well, group hypnosis sessions. And finally, I'm also interested in changing how people think in terms of ecology and that kind of thing. So I run a reforestation organisation working with indigenous groups in Brazil, black women's groups and other marginalised communities. So if you're interested in any of those things, and particularly if you have a business and want to give us money, then please talk to me afterwards. Finally, I'd like to say thank you very much to the frankincense store for providing this lovely frankincense, and thank you very much, Tim.
Danny Nemu.